welcome to our fourth installment of Behind the Muscles, Atalanta. If you read Atalanta, you've probably noticed a thing, which is, Ermagerd, the Greeks, where am I at? Boop. Oh my goodness, the Greeks have a lady hero. And it's interesting because, this is the same culture that some of their philosophers that we love to talk about truly thought that women's best use was just as a receptacle for babies, that they have this figure that was not just like, oh, we better put a lady in there, that somebody scrounged up in order to have some gender equality, but actually was a cultural hero of the Greeks. So that's pretty darn cool. Now, an interesting thing about that. Oh, by the way, I love using pottery sometimes to see what it is that the depictions look like. We've got the fabulous sculptures and all those sorts of things, but then it's really unique, and obviously they're very stylized. They knew that people did not necessarily look the way that they were drawing them. But if we look at this little bit of an urn here, she's stacked. She's got these huge calves, and she's as tall, if not taller, than the men. She's not messing around. So it's interesting, though, that part of her story, if you look at it from a slightly kind of more symbolic point of view, super cool that the Greeks have this female hero. Interesting that they have also sort of set her apart by saying, well, it's okay that she doesn't necessarily fit our usual role. The thing is, she was raised by bears. It sort of creates a little bit of space for that to be explained and to be okay, right? Once again, we have our fun theme of young women being left out on precipices and mountains. Although, if you remember, that Oedipus was also left out there. So, there are also young men occasionally being abandoned to nature and the fates. Anyway, there we go. Okay, so she's obviously well known for and celebrated for the Caledonian hunt, and that's also where we meet Meleager and his. One of the elements of it is that he organizes the whole, in some of the myths, he organizes the whole shebang, and then she gets to take part. And the telling of the story where he actually does give credit where credit is due, rather than because he dealt the killing stroke, that he takes sole credit for it. It's an interesting element to it that actually, again, is part chivalry and also part just recognition of Atalanta's role and her bravery in it. And in some tellings, like his brothers sort of flee at the last minute, and then she's like, so that's pretty cool. And later on, he actually, in a version of the myth that's on theoi.com, he actually kills, is in a feud and kills his own brother for degrading the accomplishment and the achievement. So I love this because it's also very nicely labeled. Here we go, Atalanta, Melanion, I think this is a Greek version of his name. And then we see how enormous this boar is. He's already kind of taking care of one or two dogs. Sadly, the best crazy looking dogs I've ever seen. Love it. Anyway, so neat, huh? Okay. I do love Meleager, partly because I get a little irritated with Melanion / we'll find out that he is also sometimes referred to as Hippomenes, because later people maybe conflated him with another person or another story. But I like it. Also, look, his dog likes him a lot. That dog looks a little bit like my dog, kind of. A little bit. Not a lot. Just a little. Anyway, So there is the fact that when he gets a little bit of pushback about why is this lady coming along on this hunt, he's like, because. Part two, there is more to the story than just what Edith tells you in terms of it's actually pretty well established in a majority of the myths that I read that she does go along on the quest for the Golden Fleece, and in fact does so because Meleager decides to go. Number two, that Meleager and she were actually in love, but because she had been told by an oracle that something terrible would happen, probably that she would die or somebody else would die, if slash when she lost her virginity, that their relationship remained non non-consummated, or the reason that they did not marry. So that's kind of neat, right? Then we get to round two with Melanine. And it just is, there's a part of me that's like, oh no, because of course she gets distracted by sparkly objects. By the way, did you notice the cameo of golden apples or to recognize them from the Hercules bit of business? Yep, so woohoo, golden apples showing up in more than just one place. Yes. Now, yes. So anyway, should we on? This whole thing of not just Melanian, but also her dad being like, yeah, that's right, let's get her married off, is interesting if we take into account the fact that she had potentially, in some myths, loved Meleager. Part two, it puts a pretty strong punctuation mark on her hero career. Because if you think about the fact, and again, this is very 21st century lens that I personally, as a woman, am seeing, but it is interesting that Theseus goes through a couple of wives / couple of liaisons, and Hercules definitely has more than one woman with whom he is in love and, paired with. And so we do see the limits of the space created for Atalanta within Greek culture, where when she is married off to Melanian, there are no more tales of her adventurous exploits as a hero. So, okay, that's just me. Another thing, if you peel back one more layer, this is why I like Meleager and I don't like Melanian, because by number one, making it a competition, which without cheating she was destined to win, and then number two, having this outcome be something that she can't escape, it's actually double gross a little bit, because she's implicated in her own trapping, or implicated in her own loss of independence, because she can't win the race because of this subterfuge. And so it's a really interesting / gross way of, regardless of kind of this scenario gender-wise, it's a really, it's an interesting but also disturbing way of making it seem to somebody else like they are responsible for the crappy situation that they're in, whatever that may be. I mean, sometimes, obviously, we are responsible for our own choices, etc., etc. But I find it really fascinating when you look at it through that lens. Okay, so then, although her exploits and her adventures kind of end being married to Melanian or Hippomenes, the mythology or the stories woven around her continue. There is a son that ends up in part of the ancient literature of the Seven Against Thebes, which I know is referred to in the Sophocles Oedipus stories, the Oedipus Rex, Oedipus at Colonus, and then Antigone. So the Seven Against Thebes is a thing. I just don't know much about it, but apparently her son fights in it. Yay! And Edith mentions how they get turned into lions. This happens. She's real vague about why that happens. Well, it happens in one sense because Aphrodite, who Aphrodite gave Melanion / Epaminondas the apples and is like, I'll help you win because I love. But then Melanion forgets to be properly thankful or worshipy toward Aphrodite. So then she's like, well, you know what then? I'm going to make you guys really, really want to have some romantic adult times together in somebody else's temple. And then that other temple person, they're going to get pissed off and you're going to be in big trouble. And that's what happens. It's unclear whether it's Hera's or Rhea's or Zeus's temple. And then it is Artemis, I think because she is a goddess with chastity, but also a goddess of wilderness, and she's also sporty and athletic. Artemis, who's like, this will not do. And so they get turned into lions because the Greeks apparently mythologically were not very aware of their zoology. And so didn't think that lions couldn't mate with themselves. They thought that lions could only mate with leopards. And so that's why they were both into lions. A, they were transformed into an animal. B, because they had adult romantic times in a temple, they were, according to them, not allowed to ever have romantic adult times ever again. So that's an interesting bit. The last bit of business that I think is interesting, if we go back to again my own lens, where I'm like, oh no, but it's interesting that as Edith tells the story, you see a little bit of Edith's own cultural biases, or the biases of the time, sneak in, where she's like, I don't know why anybody would want to marry somebody who was so muscly and sporty and athletic, whereas really in the myths and even in bits of pottery and whatnot, she's not at all seen as being unattractive. In fact, she is, described as being lovely and all the other sorts of things that generally go with the perfect people who are in these myths, but that it's not as if the people around her are repulsed by her strength or her athleticism or anything like that. So, it's always interesting to see the lenses through which we ourselves perceive these stories. So there you go. Okay, this has been Atalanta Behind the Muscles. I hope that you are having a great day or morning or evening whenever you see this, and take care. Okay, bye.